We're expected to be the department that is in the know.
In the first hour, most of us are probably in the position of we're looking into it, we'll get back to you.
This all hinges on whether you have a solid inventory.
Once that contract is signed, all your leverage disappears.
Security culture eats security strategy for breakfast.
I'll just start with, why are we here? Why did we put together this webinar? Well, first off, we're seeing across organizations the fact that third, fourth, nth party risk management is just super hard. It's increasingly hard, even. We have CISOs who are telling us it's a slow process for us. It's very manual. We're dealing with questionnaires, back and forth with vendors. We're chasing them. We're trying to get answers that we can't necessarily fully trust. And even if we do get the answers to our questionnaires, it's still very much point in time. We don't have visibility into what's happening today based on certain breaches, and we don't have visibility into the rest of the ecosystem, the vendors of the vendors, the fourth parties, the nth parties. So our thesis at FISO is that there has to be a better way. There has to be an automated way to do things through AI, and not through questionnaires, but through what we call artifacts, pieces of data, reference documents such as SOC 2 reports, pen tests. And we want to be able to assess a vendor not in a couple weeks or even a couple months sometimes. And that means onboarding a new vendor takes just that much time, but in a couple hours or even a couple minutes, with a very tailored view of the assessment based on the business context of that relationship. And so we're able to massively streamline TPRM programs, third-party risk management programs, through software and through AI. And that's really what we specialize in. And we're able to take it from very point in time to continuous monitoring, where if there's a breach somewhere in the ecosystem, we have complete visibility as to what is the impact of that breach for the organization, so that we can lead an effective incident response at the level of the organization. So there's a tremendous opportunity through technology to streamline the process, but nothing replaces an actual effective program from a governance standpoint and from a leadership standpoint. And that's really what we want to talk about today. And so joining me in this webinar is Paul Valente, our co-founder and chief customer officer, former CISO. So he's experienced firsthand those challenges, and that's why he built the entire company around it. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Corentin. I'm delighted to be here.
And introducing Matt Sharp. Matt is one of our customers, CISO at Exactly. Matt, tell us everything. What do you do at Exactly? Tell us about the business.
Yeah, okay. I guess that's healthy background. So Exactly is a company in the category of sales performance management or intelligent revenue platform. And so what that means is we help people plan, manage, design, compensate, and forecast the revenue streams. So we're very much serving the office of the CFO and the office of the chief revenue officer. I think, you know, Exactly is a 20-plus-year-old company. We basically invented this space. And over the 20 years, of course, we've grown. We were purchased by private equity after an IPO. So the original founder took us all the way to IPO, and then we were brought private. We recently have been undergoing a transformation, go-to-market, financial, and a tech transformation. So at this point, we have been very aggressive to release AI into the marketplace. We have agents in market today, generally available, and the team is very aggressive in the development roadmap. And so I think that's a little bit of background. I guess on the other hand, because I think it's germane to the conversation, because we're backed by Vista. Vista has been very clear about the AI mandate and the opportunity for upside in value creation for customers and also for value creation for the business, that we should be aggressive in adopting AI inside of our business. And that also includes productive adoption to enable the workforce. And so, inside of our business, we're actively utilizing AI in go-to-market, in finance, in legal, in our development teams, and on down the line. So we have been very aggressive, and I think the evolution of AI has really led to a refocus on third-party risk. It felt like third-party risk was super relevant in the area of the data breaches that Home Depot and others experienced, TJ Maxx and some others, and
10
sort
years
of
ago. Yep.
drifted away, and then now it's kind of coming back center stage. So hopefully
So,
that's a bit about exactly, and I run the security program here.
yeah, thank you for the context. Awesome. It's amazing to see how pervasive AI now is within your organization, all the way to automating some more back office related functions, such as third-party risk management. So I want to get specifically into that. And the title of our webinar is What Happens When Your Vendor's Vendor Has a Problem? So I want to get right into that kind of scenario. At the end of August, we had the sales loft drift incident, and it caused a lot of nightmares for CISOs because perhaps your organization is not necessarily a direct customer of a sales loft drift or any other organization that may get breached, but potentially key vendors in your ecosystem are actually key customers and they own your data. And so you may have a data breach through a vendor that you don't actually have. So I'm really curious to understand your perspective. What happens when you see on the news there's a massive data breach? You don't even know if you're impacted. How do you establish in the first, say, couple hours what your exposure is, and what is the process at your level with your team within the organization? What does that look like? I'd love to start with you, Paul. You've been in that seat. How did that what did that look like for you?
Yeah, yeah. I've got a particular memory from that really, really sticks with me. That is not a happy one. I remember, one morning as a CISO stepping into the elevator and finding my CEO there with me. And that time it's always a fun conversation. You get to catch up quickly for a few minutes while you traverse floors. And in this case, he asked me about a breach that he'd heard about in the news at a company. And he wanted to know right away. What was top of mind for him was, were we impacted? How were we affected? And the fact is, I didn't know. I had no idea, right? I had actually no idea that it had happened.
It was
Now, we talk about all the time about not wanting to be the department of no, as a security team. But what we need to be, and what we always want to be, and how we judge ourselves and how we're judged, is whether we're the department of in the know. We're expected to be the department that is in the know, right? That was my value on the executive team, right? And to have no idea and to be in that situation, it just felt horrible, right? My stomach is like falling to the bottom of the elevator there. In any case, yeah, that story is one that stuck with me, and along with many others, the operational challenges, of course, and the visibility challenges, and we'll talk about more here, the nth party challenges. These are the reasons, that I started this company, and that I'm so passionate about solving this problem. But yeah, not a good experience for sure.
right. Visibility is always such a challenge, especially in larger organizations where there's a large amount of vendors, or more broadly, a very large attack surface. And so visibility is often a challenge that comes up in terms of third-party risk. Matt, I'm curious, how do you look at things? And what does an investigation look like at your level when that happens?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think scale matters to your sort of
Mm.
first point. I think the other thing that really matters is there's a bunch of things that kind of immediately came to mind. If I look at the way that Allison has framed the question, or the way that you framed, company got popped, vendor incident hits the news, how prepared do you feel? I mean, there's so many different variants of this, right? Was it vendor got popped because of a piece of open source, like Log4j, and do we have Log4j? There's another version of vendor got popped because of an M&A, like the Sales Loft acquired Drift, and now you've got a sort of M&A piece, and the question is like, well, are we actually, we're a SalesLoft customer, but we might not be a customer of the Drift component in this case. And so, like, are we consuming those services? That's a different sort of question. Um, then, there's a broader question of like, firsthand, could have just been that we're a direct customer of Drift in this case, right? The question of like, our how good is our inventory of vendors, right? Because
Yep.
we've done a BIA. How serious did the business take it when they interviewed? Did they accidentally forget a thing? Is that BIA dated?
Right.
Have they added net new vendors in the last whatever? Did you onboard a new chief marketing officer who onboarded 30 vendors? Like, what happened since you
Right.
created some of those stale artifacts? Yeah, so it's a lot to unpack, and I think you're going to different data sources across the board. You could be going to finance, you could be going to your BIA, you could be going to your source code management system in order to answer these questions. And in the first hour, I think most of us are probably in the position of, unless it's a very simple open closed case, like most of us are saying something like, well, we're looking into it, we'll get back to you. I think that's probably the best that a lot of companies are offering at that point.
Yep.
What I'm hearing is what I think is often underestimated is just the visibility into whether or not that vendor is used within the organization, because sometimes it can be a very small part of the business running a vendor on a credit card for $20 a month, and there's no legal involved, there's barely any finance involved. Sometimes it may even be on a personal credit card, but there's company
Freemium.
freemium.
Freemium's the other thing. Like,
Yeah.
we had recent conversations with people who have business models, Grammarly and Postman and others have these freemium models where,
Right.
devs are using their content, and the question they even via the purchasing process, like there are people that will eventually ask for forgiveness, but that are not actively part of the formal process. So
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this all hinges on whether you have a solid inventory. And if you have a solid inventory, depends on whether you have a program that is operationally sound and scalable and efficient. And so it can be a little bit of work, that initial investigation, or it can be a ton of work, right? And as we all know, you mentioned with Matt in terms of freemium, with so many products being available from kind of an individual and a consumerized kind of sort of basis, there's things that you might be using that you're going to have to start investigating whether you've got to bring those in house in order to deal with the breach. And there's just a lot to do, and it all is on that basic foundation of how operationally sound is my program and how comprehensive therefore is the data that I have available to me.
Paul, I think, I mean, it's spot on, and I want to go much deeper into what you just mentioned, because we have on this webinar, we have CISOs, we have heads of GRC, heads of TPRM, analysts. So I want to get really, really tangible here. If both of you were to coach, let's say a junior CISO stepping into the role and needing to tackle third, fourth, nth party risk management, what would your recommendations be? What would you tell them in terms of setting up the foundation?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think the first thing, the first step is raising awareness among the executive leadership about
Sure.
this issue. Now, it's fairly intuitive for folks, right? In terms of the fact everybody knows that we kind of rely on, excuse me, on other companies almost to do almost everything that we do nowadays, right? And so executives are very kind of keen on that basic premise. And that essentially is the conversation starter to then, okay, let's make sure there's a mechanism in place for when we buy things, when we procure things, that the security team, the governance team, however you're set up from a risk standpoint, the risk team is actually in the loop. And there is where comes in a really important challenge, which is being a great business partner and being very, very supportive to your business. Right now, I mean, think about it. I mean, all the CISOs listening on the call, everybody knows that kind of like everybody hates TPRM, right? It's miserable. It slows down the business. It's not what people wake up in the morning wanting to interact with, right? Is the TPRM team. And it's really your job to change that. If you want comprehensive data, you need to set up a fast automated process that doesn't slow down the business, allows you to get that inherent risk profile on really every relationship and every interaction that the company does, which means you need to do that, kind of hands-free. It needs to be automated. And then to be able to very, very quickly go deep where you need to go deep and be detecting where it's reasonably expected, those fourth party and those nth party relationships, and put yourself in a position to be prepared when things happen.
I love it. Thank you. If I just summarize what I heard, it's first and foremost raising awareness. It's, hey, we have 500 vendors that we do business with today that are involved in our tech stack, in our data architecture, and so on. And perhaps we have 120 of those who are absolutely tier one critical vendors. So raising awareness, being a great business partner, deep collaboration across the business. 3, get it done as effectively as possible. Fast, automated process to map out the risk for every vendor, every relationship as effectively as possible. And then go deep where needed, perhaps the most critical vendors, and expanding to fourth, nth party. Did I get that right?
You got it. Yeah, that's an excellent summary.
Matt, what's your take on this? What would you, how would you coach a junior CISO stepping into the role and needing to address TPRM?
I think I tend to anchor to frameworks. Actually, we wrote the book that I wrote brings a lot of sort of business centric content, and the framework or the thought process that I anchor to here is a Pareto principle, is 80-20.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that makes sense is a junior CISO generally isn't a CISO who's going to be in a Fortune 500 company, right? Right? Like that's not where you get where you cut your teeth. And what that means is that the junior CISO will be resource constrained, and inherent in sort of resource constraints, and then the deep complexity of what's going on in third party risk. There will be a handful of actions that you can take that have an outsized impact on the overall program and on the overall impact that you'll have on the org. And so I think one of the reasons that I brought my program to Viso from other providers was because I felt like for the bang for the buck, mitigating risk during the procurement and renewal process was like the greatest opportunity that I have. At that moment, I have the upper hand in terms of leverage with my stakeholders and with the third party. I can put pressure for contractual terms. I can put pressure for insurance coverage. I can put pressure for them to even build things that might not even exist in their product at that point. And then once that contract is signed and you're in a multi-year or whatever, like all your leverage disappears. So this to me is like the number one opportunity. So when I think about Pareto principle, that's one. The second sort of the second framework that I anchor to is probably the theory of constraints. And so if you think about uh, um, third-party risk management from a maturity perspective, there are a handful of activities that you're going to do, but one constraint will always elevate to the top, and then you focus on that constraint. And once you've eliminated that constraint, then you move to the next constraint, which is impeding your ability to scale or to achieve the degree of security that you have. And so I think that would be the next piece, is just be very keenly aware of what is your current constraint. So if you're focused on Pareto principle and you're focused on the constraints, then I think you're going to iterate through. Most junior level CISOs in small resource constrained orgs probably are not going to get to a full, like, the handful of folks that sit on the advisory board, uh, like, you know, the third party risk program at Verizon or at Barclays or at uh, something like that is very different than the program that a junior level CISO is going to be able to afford to build. And so I think just being aware of the capital constraints that you also face is very important.
Yeah.
Right.
Long-winded answer. Sorry for the yeah. Anyway,
No, I
Yeah.
love it.
That's
Paul,
great
you want to
advice.
go ahead?
Yeah, I think you brought up a couple important points that really resonate with me. I think it's so important to have a pragmatic approach with third-party risk, and to make sure that you're resourcing it in a way that makes sense for your business, right? You talked about resource constraints. I mean, I think this across the board, folks have found that, to kind of do the really, really kind of deep manual work of TPRM could be very, very expensive, and it can very, very quickly scale beyond what's actually going to be valuable from a coverage standpoint, right? Companies have hundreds, some cases thousands or tens of thousands of vendors, and the manual approach just doesn't work. Now, it needs to be pragmatic in such a way, and efficient and effective in such a way, that you're able to actually participate in risk reduction activities. And you need a lot of kind of bandwidth from leadership, from folks that are very skilled, available to do that. They can't be hung up with chasing vendors and analyzing questionnaires and reading SOC reports, which are things that can be, of course, automated today. And how do you get that value? The value from risk reduction comes from, like you said, Matt, in terms of these certain points in the relationship, the beginning of the relationship, the renewal, where you have the opportunity to sometimes influence vendor selection, right?
mhm.
You can sometimes influence how we're going to configure this particular relationship from a technical level in order to reduce risk. You can, like you said, work into the contract remediation or put pressure on the vendor to do things differently. You also have the chance to come up with contingency plans. And then the last one, as you mentioned, Matt, insurance. Now, you can only do these kind of high level things if all the blocking and tackling, all the chasing vendors, all the making sure that they respond, all the analysis of evidence, and you want it to be about evidence, not about questionnaires, which are filled out typically by salespeople. No offense to anybody who's involved in sales. All of us are in some way, shape, or form. In any case, you want quality data, and you can only get that at scale, through automation today. And this is all so that you have the bandwidth for those high value activities around reducing risk.
Yeah. Paul, thank you. That's actually a perfect segue into where I was heading next, because Matt was talking about really two main things. First is the 80/20. It's what are simple things that you can do in order to have maximum impact at minimal cost, effort, time, resources, and so on, and shifting it as early as possible into the procurement and renewal phase before things are actually signed. I think I heard when we did our customer advisory board, one of the CISOs actually mentioned, in most cases, it's like you fall in love with a house, you sign the papers, and then you do the deep analysis afterwards, and you discover all sorts of issues, but then it's too late. So what you're saying, Matt, is shift the process left, do it as early as possible into the procurement phase, the renewal phase. You get to perform some remediation at that level, whether it's technological, whether it's contractual or insurance. And that way you're doing it in a position of maximum leverage. And you can actually only do that if you have the right relationship across the business. That ties back into your first priority, Paul. And then the theory of constraints. Just work through the biggest obstacles first. And one of those big obstacles is usually the legacy process. It's, oh, well, we do a standard questionnaire that hasn't changed in a long time. It's generic, it's the same for every vendor, and it takes us a month to complete. So how do we go from that, and sometimes augmented by scanners as well, which are also seen as fairly generic? How do we go from that to a more automated state based on evidence, where it's potentially where the entire program is potentially just run by one person, and it leads to vendor onboardings in a couple days. Matt, I'm curious for you specifically, how did that work? How did you change the process to get to that state, and what would you recommend to others?
I think if you look at the history of our program and our company, like we're a company founded by a salesperson designed to serve salespeople. We're all about the revenue, right? And so I think when I came into the org a few years ago, one of the things that I did was look at our team, and we've made quite a few changes on the team since then. But uh, we had a group that was dedicated to third-party risk management, and the flip side, you're receiving inbound questionnaires from customers, and then also you're performing the outbound. And I think there can be a lot of value in the, like, you're embedded in the procurement process, so you know when early projects are happening and other things. And so I think part of the transition to more automated stuff was to highlight the benefit and the value of
Mhm.
us being embedded into the conversation early to my team, so that people were energized by it. Because, like,
Yeah,
Paul, I know you said in jest, like, nobody wants to deal with third party when they wake up. Actually, it can be one of the most insightful things that triggers awareness of things that you weren't in those meetings, right?
totally agree.
And so I think the mindset, the paradigm shift for folks on your team, like, start, the very, what is it, Gandhi, the start with yourself and then sort of expand out, like those concentric circles. I think getting yourself and your team committed to the outcomes and the success that you can drive in your program. Once you're aware of these things, you can do threat modeling and identity and access management reviews and contract reviews and a handful of other things that really actually do have a big impact,
Yeah.
that are tangential to it, but the insights are very key. Um, and then, so I think it was that. And then the other piece was I needed to sell not just to my team, but then shift um, the perspective to business stakeholders who are looking to bring folks in, right? And in this case, we had a refactored executive team. And anytime that you have executives who are brought in, their mandate is change of some kind. And when they're going to do change of some kind, they're going to bring in their friends and their contractors and their vendors and the things to sort of replicate the successes they've had elsewhere. Like, that's
Yeah.
just a natural sort of pattern.
Right.
And so in that process, we wanted to make sure that we were good business partners, as Paul mentioned, and going to execute efficiently. And the storyline that I think we sold, securing some additional budget dollars for software, where we were just using spreadsheets and Workday or and Jira as a ticketing system, was to say, we think that we can meet SLAs, and in many, although we're going to keep a conservative SLA, in many instances we're able to best those SLAs. Um, and and then the last piece would be on the downside risk perspective, which was our current program covers X number of vendors today, our critical vendors in our BIA, and probably the handful of folks that are part of the value chain and value delivery to our customers, because we're contractually obliged to look at those guys. But, like, what about this other sort of long tail of risk? We're not able to scale with this team. So I can use some software, or I can hire 2 or 3 more people to achieve this same level of diligence. The software, of course, is more efficient. And in both cases, you're comparing OPEX and OPEX. Um, and so I think those were the big, like, I had to sell to my CFO, I had to sell to the business stakeholders to change the business process, and I had to sell to my team to get folks on board. And I think all of those were relevant conversations in the, like, let's bring this thing to life. Um,
Amazing.
Not everybody agreed, and some people aren't here anymore. So, I mean, I think you have to make some hard calls along the way too.
Yeah, and you have to sell internally. And I loved your point around tying it to the business, and that's really where we see most success from our customers in modernizing the approach. It's tying it to the business, tying it to revenue, to opening new revenue streams, and readying the organization to be able to work with large regulated entities who will mandate from their vendors a very tight security posture, and you need to be able to demonstrate that, and that becomes a competitive advantage compared to other organizations who may not be as mature on the topic. And so you're going to need to sell it to the CFO. You're going to need to sell it to the leadership team, to your team internally as well. And so tying it to the business is usually a recipe for an accelerated transformation. Paul, I saw you nod several times. Tell us your thoughts based on what Matt just shared.
Yeah, yeah. Matt, that was super comprehensive, and I love that perspective. And a couple things that really resonate for me is that as a CISO, as a security team, engaging with the business and being part of this process is hugely educational for your team about how the business works, about where the data flows, about what's happening and what the initiatives are. And it's a tremendous opportunity to build the right sort of security culture in the organization. It's something I kind of say all the time. I've adapted something somebody else said that's very famous. Security culture eats security strategy for breakfast, right? Ultimately, it's the rest of the company that is making decisions every day that impact security rather than the security team. And for the security team to be able to lead in that regard, they need to be great to work with, and they need to be seen as really aligned with the goals of the business, and being engaged in that process, and really doing two things: providing a very speedy process that can help folks make decisions early and upfront is one of those areas of being a great business partner. And then, having been involved in this for so much time, one of the things that I've seen is really closely correlated is that really good companies and good partnerships are the companies that have good security programs and good risk programs, right? And this could be any size, it could be any level of maturity in some cases. And what we're really doing is helping our business partners make better decisions about vendors, right? A lot of times when they find out that there's maturity issues, that there's transparency issues, that gives them indication of what they're going to be like as business partners, right? If you work with those vendors. And so this is really valuable information for your stakeholders, and that, along with efficiency, reliability, very easy to understand information about security posture, and easy to digest information for your business stakeholders, for them to be involved in those decisions. These things build trust, build that culture of security in the organization that ultimately makes your program and your company successful.
I mean, let's be honest, Paul. In some cases, it's just a roadblock. It's just a speed bump, right? And that might actually be the case on a transformation journey. I think out of the gate, the win could be we get this low value activity done quick.
Yeah.
And then you can transform the narrative. Yeah,
It's true.
I just think there's a lot of folks who are putting, like, there's so much sentiment that a SOC 2 report is complete bullshit, and then you can buy your way into a SOC 2 with a low end provider, and like then you take this a BS artifact and you pass it along, and somebody else looks at it, and then, like, the comment that you made earlier, Corentin, about falling in love with the house and what have you. Like, it's a speed bump and that is true for some programs. Honestly, I think it's true for a lot of programs.
Yeah.
If I'm honest. So
I mean, there's definitely situations where selecting a vendor is a foregone conclusion, and the information that you provide is not going to be pertinent to that decision. That's a reality. There are times where let's face it, folks have to make opportunity and risk decisions
yeah,
about vendors, and there's times where the opportunity just literally outweighs the risk, right? And this is the reality of business, right? And
it's the
so,
reality of AI today. I mean, I think there's a, like,
absolutely.
when you
Yeah.
look at the innovator's dilemma and some of the disruptive changes that are coming, like, you can sit on the sidelines, but the truth is 50% of the S&P was from 10 years ago doesn't exist today, full stop. And so that's coming faster, right? Moore's law has compressed, and I think we'll look back 5 years from now and we'll see 50% gone.
Yeah,
uh,
totally
so
agree.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Matt, Paul, I'm curious, as we only have a couple minutes left, what's question that I haven't asked you that you wish I had asked? What's a topic that you'd have loved to talk about that we haven't discussed yet?
We
I
haven't
mean,
really got it. Sorry, go ahead. You can go, Matt.
fourth party, nth party. I feel like that's the missing piece. Yeah.
Let's go. What's your take on it in terms of growing challenge, and also how do you address it effectively?
Systemic risk, right? I think the real question is visibility first. You talk about the 80. If I started with Pareto. What percentage of your portfolio of critical vendors rely on Okta, and what are they going to do if Okta has an issue? That's a scary proposition, right? And it's not just Okta; it's Palo, and it's I'm just picking on the security guys because we know who has dominant market share. But like, it could be exactly, or it could be Viso, or it could be whatever. I think when that sort of notification, we start at the top, when that notification of company got popped, how are you going to know about, first, are they in your ecosystem? And then the next sort of step is, like, who are the dominant players that have strongholds in the majority of our sort of uh, services and value delivery?
What are
And just
big
having an opinion there would be great, right? I think the platform, I'll just sort of pitch for you guys because I don't know you're going to get to say this, so I'll do it for you. The idea of having um, a graphical map of uh, fourth and nth party, I think, is super valuable because you can understand where there are concentrations of use, and then when those notifications about threat issues pop up, at least you can be hyper vigilant for a subset of vendors. Like, you can't manage and message all of your vendors every time that everything happens.
Right.
Um, like, then they become the whiz advisory that I get once a day, and that just goes straight into a folder, right? So
it becomes
Right.
noise.
Or
That's
fatigue.
what we need to be
yeah,
careful.
Yeah. Yeah. I tend to think about the evolution of kind of what's expected of us and what's reasonable as kind of like the standard of care.
mm,
And I remember, Matt, you may have brought something up around this, and perhaps in a prior conversation as well. Not that long ago, it was not reasonable, really, for CISOs to know about all the third parties that their companies work with. Right? It was acceptable to say, okay, these are the 10 or the 20 or the 100 critical, and this is what I'm going to focus on, right? And I'm going to scope my compliance, around that, and nobody's going to hold me to knowing more, than that. But the fact is, in terms of what can affect your company and what's reasonable today with AI, is it is possible to have a very comprehensive program and that inventory to be very strong. Now, it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be shadow this in the corner or whatever, but you can get pretty close with what's possible with AI today. And that then brings you to, okay, you're not going to have full visibility into every vendor's environment, but vendors do make available and is available, to motivated individuals, a list of fourth parties that your vendors use. And so at this point, it is possible to deliver in a program. And you mentioned in your situation, Matt, you using Viso, but there is, we can essentially deliver today, from artifacts, from websites, from regulatory filings, from policies that change day to day, in terms of service. We can mine those parties, we can map them, and it's reasonable to expect that as CISOs and as security leaders, we are responsible for knowing these fourth parties, right? And so it's important that we do our diligence and we position ourselves to be able to respond effectively with what's available to us, right? That's essentially the standard of care, right? If that information is reasonably available, we're on the hook for knowing about it, right?
Right. And we see a lot of organizations, to your points, both of you, who also integrate platforms such as Viso into their broader tech stack with procurement platforms, with even Ironclad and legal platforms, identity tools. You mentioned Okta,
mm,
Matt, previously, and they may they may not assess in detail all 5,000 vendors. They may focus on tier 1, tier 2. However, having that knowledge in real time of what software is used within the organization, that allows for key insights across the fourth party ecosystem and the nth party ecosystem, because then if there is a breach of one of those vendors, then we can at least investigate, get an idea of what's going on, and potentially have our platform or agent reach out to that vendor automatically to ask for specifics on their investigation and what was potentially leaked as part of the incident. And so we're seeing more and more of that automation of those different platforms actually working together, MCP integrations, and faster speed, better visibility across the ecosystem to get to a complete mapping, or as complete as possible, of fourth and nth party risk, areas of concentration. To your point, Matt, there are kind of single points of failure across the ecosystem where if there is an incident there, then it has numerous ramifications, whether it's a data breach or even just a downtime of AWS East 1, for example.
There
Okay,
you go.
what's the impact of that? So
Yep.
we're definitely seeing it across the board. Before we close, any final thoughts, any final topics, any final messages that you wanted to make sure we got to? Matt, tell us about your book, The CISO Evolution. Is that the one behind you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we published this in 22. It's basically mine and my co-author Rock's take was, so two operators in the cyber world for a long time, both MBAs, with an opinion that an MBA isn't necessary, but the business knowledge that comes from them is absolutely critical. And so, yeah, so we took that knowledge and we broke it down into three core pillars: business fundamentals. It was like a leadership, and I forget the third pillar. It's been you caught me on the spot here. I should have had this scripted. Yeah, and we just tried to be transparent and highlight both our successes and failures at the time in the sort of cloud evolution, to give tangible examples to people about how things worked and how things in some cases didn't work, with the expectation of, contribution back to the community, and I don't know, maybe in some weird way legacy. Yeah.
And tying it to the business. I think that's a recurring theme from this conversation, is making sure that third party risk, fourth nth party risk, in terms of program, is deeply embedded across the business, tied to revenue, tied to key business objectives, so that it doesn't happen in a silo slowing down the business, but it actually becomes even a competitive differentiator. And the more we can automate, the more we can accelerate the entire process, the more we can shift it left as early as possible in the conversation and in the engagement with that vendor, the better, and the more it'll serve the business. So Matt, Paul, thank you both for the conversation. If there's any interest from our audience in going deeper into certain areas of the conversation or into VISO in general, please feel free to reach out, and we will see you in about a month for the next webinar. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Matt. It's great. Thanks, Allison.